Welcome everyone to this book review and the series of book reviews that we are doing as part of the new Evangelisation Project for the Archdiocese of Glasgow. My name's Joe Murphy, and it's a pleasure to be joined again by Canon Conroy and John Connolly. Hi guys.
Hi.
Today we're going to talk about quite a contemporary book. It's a book that was just published this year, and it's a comedian's prayer book by Frank Skinner. I took the contemporary way of reading it by downloading it on my Kindle. So I don't have a hardback or an actual physical copy of the book just now, but that's what we're going to be discussing today. And in fact, it was actually one of Kindle's books of the day recently. You could buy it for 99p, so it may come up again in the future. Maybe worth keeping an eye out and see if that's one that tickles your fancy. But I don't know if you're aware, but Frank Skinner is a comedian. He is a television presenter and he's a radio presenter. And it's a very short book. It's a really easy read. It's only about 50 odd pages or so, and it's broken up into short paragraphs, long paragraphs. Some paragraphs are literally only one sentence, and really it's the clues in the title is about prayer, and it talks about what he thinks about prayer and what that means, and he develops that into discussions around his faith and things like that as well. Now, Frank Skinner is a Catholic. He grew up as a Catholic. He was born into a Catholic family. He did have a blip in the middle. He left the Catholic Church when he was 19. However, he did come back. And really, that was part of the reason that he felt he wanted to write this book. He felt that he wanted to put his hands up, proclaim that, yes, I am a Catholic. I'm not ashamed of that. And it's something that it's part of me. And that's what he says. He says that that's part of the reason he wanted to write that book. He describes God in the context of the 21st century as being defiantly uncool. He wanted to challenge the cult or the significant individual. Basically, he talks about people looking inwards these days as opposed to outwards. And that sounds quite deep and in-depth, but it's not that type of book. It is quite humorous. It's actually very, very funny. And if you know Frank Skinner, you'll know the type of humour that will be in the book. So he really wanted to discuss his faith in the context of prayer and things like that. So as the title suggests, it's really thoughts and musings and just it's like reading an inner monologue of Frank Skinner's thoughts as he's praying and about praying. So we're just going to talk about some of the issues and some of the themes that he discusses within the book. So one of the things that he talks about in the book was his concerns and his worries about how, when you're praying, how do you address God? He actually mentions he's not sure sometimes who he's speaking to. He doesn't know if he's speaking to Jesus, God the Father, or the Holy Spirit. And he says himself, I feel I owe it to you to speak as elegantly as possible. But then he counters that with saying things such as, I'll just pray as usual, my mind wandering between the divine and the domestic, which I'm sure we can all relate to. We want to be focused as much as possible during our prayer, but we're human. We have this challenge of staying focused all the time, and our minds do wander at the best of times. So I suppose the first thing that I wanted to just talk about was really how should we pray? Should we be worrying about the words and the phrases that we're using while we pray? And how do we go about addressing God while we're praying? So I'll just open that up to you guys at this moment.
Yeah, I think that's a theme I really took from the book, Joe, was this idea about how you actually pray, how do you go about it, and it's interesting that Frank Skinner talks about that from his own kind of personal perspective. And I think what you said a minute ago about how do you address God, I think maybe I've felt that way in the past. And I think growing up as a young Catholic, you know, some of the times I would almost be too cumbersome in terms of how I address God and how I pray. It's almost a sense of trying to be overly jargonistic or even quite cryptic in how you speak to God. And I think through maturity and through my own journey, I think one of the things I've tried to do is to realise that God can see right into our hearts. So there's no point in trying to present barriers through terminology and not being clear as to, you know, what you're trying to say and the words that you use. I mean, I think using too much jargon, I think, can sometimes make prayer seem a little bit artificial to me. And if God does have a personal relationship with us and we have a personal relationship with God, to me, it should be one of those things whereby you feel comfortable about completely being yourself. I watched an interview recently with Frank Skinner when he was promoting the book, and he was asked about the fact that he called this book a comedian's prayer book and the significance of prayer. And one of the things that he said, which really, you know, stuck with me, was that when he prays, it's the one place he can truly be himself. As a performer, he's always putting hats on, be it for his television shows, his comedies, stand-up performances. He's living a kind of alternative life in a way through performance. And I suppose we can all do that. Like, you know, when I go to work, I'm a certain type of person. I behave in a certain type of way. I conform, even in different social situations. You might wear different hats depending on, you know, the context, and that's okay. That's part of human nature. But in your prayer time, you can truly be yourself, and you don't have to worry about feeling self-conscious, insecurities, or you might talk about those things in your prayer, but it's a safe place. And I think that's what Frank Skinner's really conveying here, is that the importance of prayer is not just about that the prayer in and of itself. It's the fact that you can be very present. And I think that's quite a useful take on things. Father, did you take anything from it?
Yeah, I found it a very human book. You know, I think there was one chapter in it, or one section in it, where he said he'd like to see Catholicism being more human. And I think he compared it, you go into a shop and you see all these smelling Buddhas, and you know, that people buy, but you don't really see them buying too many crucifixes. Yeah. But I thought that what came across from it all was that the prayer, the way that he prayed, it was very human. It's as you were saying, that there was no artifice about it. It was just, this is who I am, and these are my problems. These are the things that are going through my mind, and I want to talk to you about them. Just, I mean, when you've got a really good friend, you sit down and you talk to them, you know, about what's going on in your life, and you've got someone there that you can do that with. You're very lucky. And that's what he's saying. Well, God's there, and that's what I do with God. That's how I pray. So it's real, you know. It's no kid on stuff here. It's not, let's pretend we're nice people or we're not nice people. You know, this is who I am, and these are the things I'm struggling with, or I'm enjoying, or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I suppose that touch that you mentioned there about it just being a very human book. As I said, it's almost like hearing his inner monologue as he's writing or as you're reading it. And for me, it was just all so relatable. I don't think there's anyone that could read that book, a person of faith anyway, who can read that book and not relate to, if not all of it, at least some of it. So as you say there, Father, it is certainly a human book. And John, as you mentioned that, I think I read the same interview yourself, and he talks about being open and available to God while he's praying. But he also mentions almost God as being like CCTV. It's always looking out for him. He uses God and his faith as almost a guiding handrail that takes him through his life, and he doesn't feel that that's he's got somebody looking what he's doing and judging him all the time. He feels it was a comfort as a guide that he's got through his life. So again, in the book itself, it develops that, and I would certainly encourage anybody who's of faith, who's not of faith, or certainly someone who's thinking about coming into the faith, I would encourage you to read the book, because it has got these very human elements to it. Another topic he discusses in the book itself is he mentions about being in his industry and comedy and media. He's surrounded by a lot of non-believers, a lot of atheists, and he feels like he's certainly in the minority there. And again, I think as people of faith, we can relate to that. We can relate to that. But he also talks about some people, particularly in this modern time, who might feel that they might not believe in God, but there's a spiritual element out there, or there's a positive energy, I think he calls it in the book. And he thinks that these people could potentially come into the Catholic Church or come into the faith, but they don't want to be labelled as being strange almost, because I think if you're a Catholic, look, there's millions of Catholics around the world, of course, but in the modern society and in such a secular society we live in, we can almost be deemed quite strange. And he mentions at one point in the book, when he comes out Mass at the week and he bumps into people walking down the street, some people will almost look at them and think, why are you in there on a Sunday morning? Why are you wasting your time? You should be too busy. I'm too busy to go to Mass. So he talks about sort of atheism in the modern society. He mentions about faith as being, he calls it dynamically unmodern. And again, that's almost like a jargonistic phrase, but he does talk about it in a very humanist way. So I suppose, how can we challenge ourselves in such a secular society, in our home lives, in our work lives, and certainly in our life of faith, not to be dragged down by that? Just how do we focus on our faith as being a positive thing?
Yeah, I mean, I recognise a lot of what Frank Skinner said. I mean, the industry that I work in, within the humanities and higher education, I would say I'm in the minority in terms of, talking about my faith and even being a Christian. I think maybe that's just a microcosm of society. We've got an increase in secularism, and I think we are generally becoming more in the minority. But one of the things that I've found is trying to navigate all of that. I've stopped worrying about it as much as I used to. And I don't know if that's through my own kind of faith maturity, but what I find is when I'm in an environment where, there could be atheists, and I've got lots of friends that are atheists and, that have other faiths and so on, of course, but I often find that there's a degree of interest from people about my faith in these environments. So I'm not someone, you wouldn't believe it given the fact that we're talking about this now and we're doing the Evangelisation Project, but within my own professional life, if you want to call it that, I don't wear it on my sleeve or anything. It's just part of me. But when colleagues are aware of it, it often sparks some interest from them, and they've got more questions for me than I have for them, I often find. And I think, what Frank Skinner talks about, this idea of the modern, it's such an unmodern thing, to be a Christian. But at the same time, once people realise that Christian teachings and Catholic faith can often be an antidote for a lot of the modern challenges that people face, and a lot of the uncertainties around identity issues and, what should we be today, versus tomorrow, there's a comfort in the consistency of it. That's what I find. And I think that if you've got inner peace and you're at peace with yourself, I think it can give out an energy. And I think it can be attractive to people for them to ask questions about it. But I don't believe in, trying to go into the workplace to convert people. And I think that's very counterproductive in my own view. I think people are on their own journeys. And if they want to come and ask you questions, it's always good for us to have decent answers for them as best we can. So, yeah.
Yeah, I find it just what you were saying there, John Paul, that people are on their own journeys, and I think very often we forget that. We forget that of one another. People, I think we like to project a sense of security very often that we don't have. People, you know, we like to feel we belong, so we do things to make sure that we fit in at times, or we want to have a sense of security. We want to have a sense of certainty in life, of how we're going about life. But very often, life takes that away from us, and that's when we struggle. And I think a lot of people who don't believe, they've dismissed faith, and they've dismissed faith. Some people obviously dismiss faith because of the lack of decent witness that they see in Christians around them. But I think a lot of people dismiss faith because there is this understanding of modern life from an early age that science gives all the answers, and that's what we need to pursue. You know, technology, if we've got a problem, then we can solve it. And I think increasingly people are sort of saying, well, can we solve all our problems? How do we go about living life in a world where there aren't always answers to our questions? And one of the things that I found interesting in the book was, he said that he asked a question, I think, and you know, he said, is there a richness to faith that knowledge doesn't have? Is when we're looking for something in life, I suppose we're looking for a richness in life. And I think knowledge doesn't give that. You know, it gives us an awful lot. But most people, I think, are looking for something more than that. And faith, I think, provides another avenue of approach to life to sort of show us, well, this is a wonderful life. There's a lot of problems in it, but it can still be wonderful. We can still find a meaning and a purpose in our life, even although we struggle at times with things. And so I found that encouraging from the book.
Yeah, just to kind of add to that, when people ask about faith, and I think, you know, Frank Skinner gets it all the time, there's a sense that people are really quite, I think there's a bit of almost a dichotomy between his professional life and his private life. You know, this idea of being sometimes quite a blue comedian at times, you know, and also a committed Catholic. And I think there's something to take from that for me. You know, when I'm talking about my own faith, and people ask me about it, one of the things I start with is, are you sure you want to take any advice from me? Because I'm the worst in it, you know. But if you want, I can tell you about my experience, and often I would say is just go back to the gospel, you know, the teachings of Jesus Christ, and you know, and read that. And if there's anything in there that helps you understand your predicament a little bit more. Sometimes what happens, I think, is that people get turned off when you get to the accountability end of faith. So on the one hand, faith can help you navigate the sufferings and the challenges we face, but we are accountable for our actions as well. So when we get to the stage of talking about things like reconciliation, praying for forgiveness, not just thanksgiving, I think that's often where folks start to struggle a wee bit, is the responsibility and accountability, and maybe I have as well over the years. I think maybe that's a common thing. So I think, you know, it's something for faith leaders to try and get round, I think, is how do you make sure that faith isn't just about being grateful for what you've got and being thankful to God, although that's important, but it's also understanding that we are accountable for what we do. And Frank Skinner has said that there's certain lines of comedy he won't do now, well, since he came back to Catholicism. So he says he never, ever does jokes about God, and he never, you know, does anything that could be received as blasphemous. So maybe that's his way of being held to account, if you know what I mean, even though he's quite happy to talk about a range of other topics.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because I think in the book he talks about his own uncertainties in his relationship with God. And I think someone who makes jokes about God, you know, I feel that very often they're doing it from a stance of certainty. You know, that they've made up their mind that this is unimportant, and so I can just make a joke about it. And the jokes aren't, I mean, Catholics make joke about their faith in God all the time, but the way that there's just a difference in the way that the humour comes out, that they're almost laughing at themselves at times, because they're aware of, you know, there isn't this certainty, just as there's no great certainty in relationships. You can be certain up to a point, but then there is this, I suppose, level of mystery in a relationship that, you know, you've got to respect. And I think that comes through, even when he tells jokes in his book about God and you know, well, humorous aspects of how he relates to God. But it's still, it touches a truth, I think, of that relationship that exists between the person who believes in God. That it's not all cozy, it's not all nice. There is uncertainty there, but underlying that uncertainty, there is a certainty of an existence of a relationship that is solid.
Absolutely. As we mentioned earlier on, he did leave the Catholic faith at 19, and he battled alcoholism for a number of years as well. So he's now teetotal and a committed Catholic. But as you mentioned, John, certainly maturity comes into it as you grow older. You become more experienced in life. And Skinner now says that he gets excited just talking about faith. That's one of the phrases that he uses in the book as well. So I think he's almost using those types of terminology to encourage others to take a leap of faith, join the Catholic faith, and you will benefit from it, certainly. And again, something that we can all relate to, and we've talked about in the past as part of the new Evangelisation Project, is about having a faith journey. Skinner himself talks about his faith as having ebbed and flowed, and obviously he's had his own problems throughout his life as well. But just as a final point, he does mention that faith now to him is more important than knowing. Now, what he means by that is there's obviously doubts out there. Does God exist? And people will always have that debate until the end of days, no doubt. But for him, he says, I would probably be disappointed if I knew today for definite if God did exist or if God did not exist. He says exactly, faith is a more powerful thing than knowing. So how do we feel about that take on things?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. What I would also like to have a conversation about, maybe in another, you know, I wouldn't have time for it today, but in the future, is the whole idea of knowledge anyway. Because, you know, this whole pandemic, you know, and this idea of the post-truth culture, you know, people think they know what they know based on what's presented in front of them, even though it can be entirely wrong. You know, so evidence can lead to knowledge, but that knowledge can be based on something that's so uncertain and vacuous. So I think that the whole notion of knowledge in and of itself is worth a discussion in the future. But I do understand where he's coming from, because surely the journey itself is such an important and fruitful one, and an exciting journey as well, that to lose that, it would be a terrible thing. I agree that, you know, but then as Catholics, we tend to know that word, you know, knowledge, that the truth, God is truth, and that is what we're striving for. I do get what he means. You know, the journey itself is important, because as part of the journey, everyone's is different. It goes it takes different ebbs and flows. And I think as part of the journey, you do end up finding maybe people, friends, family, that can actually help you along the way. I think it's quite difficult to do it purely on your own. You know, I'm just thinking about, you know, my own experience. There's been certain individuals along the way that have encouraged me, and perhaps not even overtly encouraged me actually, but just through their own behaviour, it sparked something off in me that's been useful, and I've used that and taken it forward. Even Frank Skinner himself, when he came back to the faith, when I think you said, Joe, that you know he left the faith, and I think some of that was for bureaucratic reasons. I think he was struggling with some of the social teachings at the time, but then he came back, and he said that he went to Mass, and he sat in the back row, the back pew, and he ended up talking to the priest, and the priest just listened to him. You know, he talked about why he left the faith and his alcoholism and all of that. And the priest all the priest said to him was, just come back and see how it goes. And he did. And I think through his attendance at Mass, I think it didn't happen. I think it's fair to say it didn't happen overnight. You know, he started attending Mass, and the Mass became more important incrementally, and it had a personal impact on him. So maybe there's something to be said for that, about having people that can encourage you along the way.
Yep, absolutely. Have you anything to add to that?
No, I'm happy, thanks.
That's fine, no problem. So, well, that's a little insight into the book. So thanks for joining us today to have that little discussion. Like I said, it's a very easy read. It's short, sharp paragraphs. It's very funny, and it's got very human elements to it, which I think that certainly we could all relate to. So I would certainly encourage you to read that. Also, if you've got any comments you want to make, if you've read the book or not, if you've got any comments to make, please do leave comments below this video. And also, if you've got any other recommendations for books about faith or anything that you want to see discussed as part of the new Evangelisation Project, please do let us know on our Facebook pages or our Twitter page. So thanks again for joining us today, and we'll speak to you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe.
Bye, thanks.